but at that point we didn't have a huge amount of information.
Hi, so I'm going live now. We're doing it live. So this is my live reaction to part 2 of day 8. They brought on another use of force expert for we're covering the Derek Chauvin trial against George, the people versus Derek Chauvin. In the homicide trial, or the murder trial of George Floyd. Now we've just started a new testimony of an expert witness who is testifying to the use of force, essentially.
The decision is made for Mike Phil to go to the scene at 38th and Chicago.
Yes, sir.
And that you and Agent Mueller then wait around.
This is my least favorite prosecution lawyer. He doesn't listen.
And
he
when
seems
you
nervous.
arrived there, did you, I guess, give what we call a briefing about what was known so far?
Yes, sir.
And did you learn who the involved officers were?
We did, yes, sir.
And who were those officers that you learned at that time were involved?
Officer Derek Chauvin, Officer Alexander King, Officer Blaine, and Officer Tao.
And in the course of, well, I guess I should ask it this way. Did you then initiate the critical incident protocols for this incident?
I did, yes.
And as part of that, taking photographs of each officer?
Yes, sir.
And were those officers there at City Hall that evening?
Yes, sir.
I should ask you, I guess, you said you initially got the call about 9:45 p.m.?
Correct.
Do you recall about what time it was that you arrived at City Hall?
Approximately 30 to 40 minutes later.
And yeah, can we put this up just for the witness, please? I'm going to show you Exhibit 279. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, sir.
Did you, in fact, take that photograph?
Yes, sir.
When was that photograph? Well, does this appear to be a true and accurate representation of what you saw when you took that photograph that evening?
Yes, sir.
All right, offer Exhibit 279.
Any objection? 279 is received.
I'd ask to publish it, Your Honor. And did you recall approximately when this was taken?
Shortly after I arrived at City Hall.
And through subsequent investigation that you've done, did you learn the approximate weight of the defendants around this time period?
Yes, sir.
And what was that weight?
Approximately 140 pounds. Sorry? 140 pounds.
And as a police officer since, what, approximately 2007, right?
Yes, sir.
You're familiar with what I call the duty belt, the equipment that he's wearing?
Yes, sir.
Can you just describe for the jurors, general, what is present on his duty belt?
Initially, firearm, handcuffs, mace. Usually there's a radio holder and a radio associated with that as well, and multiple magazines.
The magazine is what?
A magazine holds the bullets for the firearm.
And any body armor that he is currently wearing?
Yes, it appears that he has a vest on.
Based on your experience as a peace officer, are you able to estimate the approximate weight of the equipment that the defendant is wearing in this photograph?
Approximately 30 to 40 pounds.
We can take that down. Thank you. Now, while you're there at City Hall, did you endeavor to collect some other items of evidence or for the investigation?
Yes, sir.
And what other items did you acquire?
Part of our critical incident protocols is acquiring the officers involved in uniform as well as their equipment, including their firearm.
And did you also acquire some videos?
Yes, sir.
And on May 25th of 2020, were you aware that Minneapolis police officers wear body cams?
Yes, sir.
And did you acquire then the body cam videos for the 4 involved officers?
Yes, sir.
And can you just describe for the jurors how that process is done?
The Minneapolis Police Department Crime Lab retains the actual physical body-worn camera, downloads it, and provides it then to the BCA, to me.
And so you acquired those 4 body cam videos?
Yes, sir.
In the course of the investigation, you've acquired some other videos as well.
Yes, sir.
With regard to the body cam videos of the 4 involved officers, you have watched all of those, have you?
Yes, sir.
Those have a time stamp on them, correct?
They do. Yes, sir.
And in your review, do they appear to be consistent with each other in their timestamps?
Yes, sir.
While you were at City Hall, did you collect some other data about the incident?
Yes, sir. I collected a CAD report.
Can you describe for the jury what is a CAD report when you say that?
CAD report is a transcription of all the radio traffic associated with a specific incident.
Any other data then that you acquired there?
The milestone video.
What is that?
Milestone video is a video, city video that is positioned at the street level at various places throughout the city.
And so you learned that there was a milestone video of the location of this incident,
Yes, sir.
and you obtained that.
Yes, sir.
How about any information about the 911 call or that traffic?
Yes, I also retained the audio file from the 911 call.
You know what
While
else
you were there, at some point, did
you know what
learn
else
about,
really invalidates
a
something
Facebook video
that
of
they're
this?
trying to
Yes, sir.
say
How did you learn about that?
is that a police
Deputy
officer,
Chief Eric Forrest notified
when they
me
took
of a
George
video
Floyd
that
in,
surfaced on Facebook.
actually
Were you able to
went
watch that
into the
video?
paramedics and started
Yes,
trying
sir.
to
I've shown the
do
video.
CPR on
Do
George
you recall if you
Floyd,
watched the whole thing or parts of it?
which means
I believe it
that
was a
he
portion.
knew that George Floyd needed CPR
And throughout your investigation
Prior
of this case, you come to learn
to
that
lifting
who was
him onto the
person
gurney.
making that video or filming that?
Darnella Frazier.
That's a really, really important point. I hope the prosecution brings up,
After your duties,
because they
at,
they
City
had
Hall,
prior
did
knowledge
you,
that George Floyd
Proceed to
needed
the scene.
CPR
Yes, sir.
prior to the
And,
emergency,
when you
prior to
arrived
the
at the
ambulance
scene,
coming,
were there
which
other,
means that they knew
PCA
they needed
individuals
to
there?
change his
Yes, sir.
position one
who all was there still?
and give him
I
medical
met with
assistance
Agent Mike Phil.
prior
and,
to
crime
the
scene
ambulance
team leader
coming,
Mackenzie
and
Anderson.
they'd be aware that every minute that he
Do you recall
doesn't
about
get
what time it was that
CPR,
you arrived at
his
the
life
scene?
becomes further and further at risk.
Approximately
I
2
just
to
wanted
3
to make that point.
of the 26th.
And you mentioned the crime scene team. Can you just describe very generally for the jurors?
Yeah, I just
What do you
wanted to
mean by
make
crime
that
scene?
point.
Crime scene teams, members of our BCA laboratory who go out and forensically collect evidence.
I wanted to make
for
that point.
investigations.
Yeah.
So they investigate crimes at the scene.
Yeah, they collect and process crimes at the scene.
And who was the, well, let me ask you this way. How many members are there of the crime scene team typically?
Typically 2 to 3 and a special operations agent who is solely assigned to take video and photographs.
And so there is a team leader.
Correct.
And who was that for this case?
Mackenzie Anderson.
When you arrived at the scene, did you learn about some vehicles at the scene that were involved in the incident supposedly?
Yes, sir.
And what were those vehicles? Can you describe them?
A I believe, blue and color Mercedes-Benz and a Minneapolis Police Squad Car 320.
And so when you say the Mercedes-Benz, do you know what style of vehicle that was?
I actually don't. It's an SUV.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, I guess. And so those 2 vehicles, did you see them at the scene?
Yes.
Do you recall where they were located?
I believe they were on the south side of 38th.
And with regard to the squad car, the Minneapolis Police Squad car, did you learn anything about contents of that vehicle?
Yes.
What did you learn?
I learned that 2 $20 bills were in a manila envelope in the trunk area of the vehicle, as well as other items related to this incident.
So what did you do with regard to that envelope?
I seized those at the scene, that envelope at the scene.
And so you, by seizing it, you took it with you.
Correct.
And did you open up that envelope and see what its contents were?
Initially, yes.
And so you mentioned $20 bills, correct?
Correct.
And Your Honor, if I could show the witness only, please, Exhibit 198. Sure.
Welcome, everyone, here to News Now from Fox. We continue
Wow.
to listen right now. Another use of force investigator is on the stand for the prosecution. We are in the sidebar moment, and you are seeing the prosecution, defense, and the judge talking it out right now over a matter here. Just a reminder, everybody, that we are always with you on newsnowfox.com. And we will continue to bring you always gavel to gavel coverage right here. And it looks like we are going to listen a little bit more. Let's listen.
Try and reconvene at 1:15.
Oh, what? Oh, what a
All right, lunch
cliffhanger.
break is on. It is official right there. So we will always continue to bring you the latest here on News Now from Fox on this Derek Chauvin trial as it is going into the lunch break
This is
hour.
really
Let's bring in right
interesting
now
because
to continue our context right here. We do have attorney Ben Taylor always with us here. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us again.
Yeah, good morning. Good to see you again, and good to see everybody. As you saw this morning, you saw two use of force experts. One person they flew in from Los Angeles and paid to testify for the prosecutor, and another use of force expert who is the main lead investigator in this case. And you see this person on the stand right now. What the prosecution is trying to establish is their key element of the case is use of force. That's their main key element, and you're seeing them have many different witnesses come and testify to use of force, because in order to get a guilty verdict against Derek Chauvin, they need to establish that the knee was on the neck by Derek Chauvin of George Floyd, and that George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin. As you see, the defense attorney, they were asking many questions in regards to, well, maybe Derek Chauvin still did his job correctly, and you weren't there. You're from LA. You were paid to be here. Basically, the theme of the cross-examination was you don't know Minneapolis Police Department's tactics. So how are you able to fly in from LA, getting paid, and tell us about our own city, about how it should be done? So you see the defense attorney cross-examined earlier the use of force expert that the prosecutor brought on the stand.
And, you know, I would say it was very, very telling, Ben. I felt like during the first witness today that we saw when it was under the cross-examination with Eric Nelson, I felt like today was the first day that he really had momentum on his side when he was questioning this witness and really poking holes. What do you think?
I think, yeah, Eric Nelson, today was his first day that he really got in some good questioning. Over the past few days, as you saw, the defense attorney, Eric Nelson, wasn't really going after the witnesses. He was kind of just doing a few jabs in and a few jabs out and just sitting down. But I think he felt a little bit more comfortable because he was able to show that a picture that the knee of Derek Chauvin was on the shoulder. So that's one of his main defense. Was his knee really on his neck, or was it on the shoulder? And I think being from Los Angeles and being a use of force expert that's not from the city of Minneapolis where this murder occurred, I think he felt confident. He showed a little bit more swagger in the courtroom and by just saying, hey, you're not from here, you're not familiar with all these tactics, procedures. And he used the term totality of the circumstances. What that means is this: even though you might have policies and procedures that you have to read and train on, when you come down to a real life scenario, when you're out on the streets, Eric Nelson was trying to say is sometimes these rules might be thrown out the book because you're not there, you don't understand everything that's going on the streets, and sometimes people have to use certain.
But we do understand what that's going on the streets because we've got a video.
Trying to say is okay, Derek Chauvin, even though you might have used this, the bottom line is 9 minutes is way too excessive, and there's no way even any cop, and that's why they brought this Los Angeles police expert to try to say that even though if you're from Minneapolis, if you're from LA, no matter where you are in the United States, this is excessive force. So that's why you see the battle going back and forth in the courtroom with the prosecutor and the defense. The prosecution is mainly saying this is excessive force, but the defense attorney, Eric Nelson, did get some good shots in today, I think because the person was from LA, he was able to say, you're from LA, you're not really familiar with our Minneapolis police training procedures.
Yeah, and Ben, another moment that we saw this morning was the defense really bringing up the moment that we were seeing and hearing that George Floyd was saying, I can't breathe, way before he was on the ground there. So they were really trying to zero in on that whole moment of, I can't breathe, but you're still standing there right now.
Yeah, but he might have not been able.
So that was a very key moment. And what the defense is trying to establish is, you saw him, the defense attorney asked a couple of questions, meaning that sometimes suspects might say, I can't breathe, or I'm having a heart attack because they want to stall for time. And when you're a police officer, you may not know, is the suspect lying to you? Are they trying to stall for time? And he asked the question, are you familiar with, suspects saying these things? I'm having a heart attack, I can't breathe, to stall for time. So the defense attorney established that, and the expert witness from LA said, yes, I am familiar with suspects actually saying that to stall for time. So I think, the defense attorney really got a good point in by bringing in the expert witness who is the prosecution's expert. Whenever time you can get a prosecution's expert who's against you, for you, to say things for you, that's positive for your case. So I think today was the first day that you really see, the defense attorney, Eric Nelson, actually going, having some good points. The prosecution still has a strong case because they're bringing in their own witnesses right now. But, Eric Nelson did get some jabs in and being able to make the prosecution's expert say the things that he wants them to say.
Yeah, it's very interesting as we continue to watch along here. But we were talking about this yesterday, Ben, about, again, prosecution. I think they're going to find every use of force expert, or even anybody that even maybe wrote an article about use of force, to come on here, because how many have we had already?
Yes, I mean, the judge already mentioned in a sidebar and before the jury was in there that you're showing cumulative meaning the same people coming in over and over testifying to the same things. That can be, sometimes you have to worry about being over prosecution, and the prosecutor who can bore the jury, can over prosecute, can actually mess up, because what the prosecutor has to worry about is some of these witnesses might say inconsistent statements versus another witness. And that's what the defense attorney, Eric Nelson, is going to be doing, is taking notes and making sure that are all these witnesses saying the same thing. And you saw sometimes some witnesses might say, well, that might be excessive, that might not have been excessive. So that's the thing that Eric Nelson is trying to establish, that, hey, you can bring in all these use of force experts all you want, but I'm going to try to show inconsistent statements. What the prosecutor is trying to do is just establish and pretty much ram it down the jurors' brains that this was excessive, and no matter what, in LA, in Minneapolis, no matter what city you're in, they're trying to establish that Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd because of his actions, and no matter if you're handcuffed, if you're on the ground, he should have not been on his neck for that long. But you see the defense attorney trying to do counter arguments, saying like, look, here's a picture. His knee was on his shoulder. Look at this picture. I think it's going to come down to, was his knee really on his shoulder, or was it on his neck for a long amount of time? So that's why you have the battle back and forth. And ultimately, Eric Nelson, the defense attorney,
He's making some good points.
The course of this is beyond a reasonable doubt. He doesn't have to prove Derek Chauvin's innocence. He has to just poke some doubt in the juror's head to try to vote not guilty. So that's what he's doing. He still has a tough case ahead of him, but as you see, as a defense attorney, he's trying to poke holes in every little thing. And at the end of the day, he's going to try to say, this is some doubt here. Maybe his knee was on his shoulder. Maybe George Floyd died because of drugs and not because of Derek Chauvin's actions. And this is what Eric Nelson is going to try to establish. But of course, the prosecutor is going to come on and have all these experts for a couple of days now to try to prove to the jury and to show the world that, no, Derek Chauvin was the one who killed George Floyd.
And Ben, when do you think the prosecution is going to pivot from use of force experts to medical experts? When do you think we will see that shift on the stand?
I mean, we should see it fairly soon. I mean, today, right now on the stand is one of the main key case agents. The case agent is usually the one who's one of the key investigators of the case. So eventually they're going to try to move from all this use of force and say, hey, we established use of force. We established that Derek Chauvin had the knee on the neck, and that's what killed him. And then eventually they're going to bring in their own doctor who did the autopsy of George Floyd to say that because of the lack of air, the lack of being able to breathe, and you heard George Floyd on the tape say, I can't breathe, they're going to try to establish that because of Derek Chauvin's actions through a doctor, another high caliber expert, that Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd based upon he can't breathe. That's what you're going to see.
Very
However,
interesting.
when the defense attorney gets their chance, they probably are going to bring on their own expert to establish the fact that, wait, everybody, Derek Chauvin didn't kill George Floyd. They're going to try to say that you see this picture, the knee was on the shoulder, and they're going to have their own doctor say the drugs killed George Floyd. So you're going to have the battle back and forth of the experts, and ultimately the jurors are taking notes, listening, and they're going to believe, what expert are they going to believe? They're going to believe the prosecution's expert, or they're going to believe the defense attorney's expert. Because ultimately, Eric Nelson has to show doubt, but the prosecutor under our Constitution has a higher burden. They have to prove their case. That's why they're going first. Under our law and Constitution, the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, did Derek Chauvin kill George Floyd beyond a reasonable doubt? And that's a high burden. That's a higher burden across our land. So that is why you see all these experts.
There's a problem with this, which I'm gonna say eventually.
That this is our case. We want to make sure that you don't miss anything in our case.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the defense doesn't have to really say anything or refute really anything. I mean, it is up to the prosecution at this point to prove something. And there are these charges against Derek Chauvin. And if it's anything less than the murder, what kind of situation will we have? What kind of community aspect will we have as well if, say, Derek Chauvin only gets manslaughter?
Yes, I mean, that would be interesting to see. I mean, if they get a lesser charge, so right now he's being charged with 3 different counts. So if he gets a lesser count, that means Derek Chauvin can get less time in prison. Or if he even gets a not guilty. I mean, I think it's gonna be a hard, long road. If he gets a not guilty, we've seen it happen before in trials, and people have, gotten not guilty. All the defense attorney needs to do is put doubt in 1 or 2 jurors' heads. And if he does that, and if a juror stays strong, and we've seen in many trials, it can be what you call a mistrial. So it has to be unanimous.
Give him the chair, yeah. No, you've got the point.
Understand is it has to be unanimous. Every single juror.
But I'm just listening to this, and it's kind of fascinating to me that we're going along the lines of an argument here in which somebody who has a care of duty to an individual isn't responsible for their death if they have an overdose, right? But here's the problem with that whole theory, is that if he has an overdose, the question is, could he have survived the overdose? What is the chances of him surviving the overdose if he was given medical attention by the person who had a duty of care towards him at the time? So that's where I don't get, and I'm really interested to hear from a lawyer's point of view. If there was an angle that the prosecution could have gone for that the duty of care it's like if you meet somebody if a paramedic meets somebody who's been stabbed on the street and that person still has a chance to survive, and the paramedic just stands there over the body and just watches him bleed to death while they're on duty. What responsibility does that paramedic, and you know, say somebody filmed it, or I don't know, somebody saw this happen and they were like screaming at the paramedic, help him, you can help him, you know, do something. And they just stood there and watched them bleed to death instead of doing, you know, taking the measures needed in order to extend that person's life and get them to hospital or whatever. Why does that person who just stood there over the body, the paramedic who stood there over the body bleeding to death, does that person not have some direct criminal responsibility for the person's death? And then further that, if you take it you know, one step further, what happened on in the case of George Floyd, it becomes even more fascinating because he's actively doing something to worsen the condition of somebody who may well be in medical distress, and they knew he was in medical distress, right? Which is why they called the ambulance, right? They didn't know he was in medical distress. Why call the ambulance? They knew he was in medical distress. They called the ambulance. So again, the kind of question remains that the question remains that you're doing something to actively worsen the condition of somebody who's in medical distress, a life-threatening medical distress. And the police knew that at least 2 minutes before the ambulance arrived. They knew that because they checked the pulse and the guy had no pulse. And we know that they knew that because as soon as the policeman put him on the gurney, one of the police officers, who I believe should actually be let off, actually, one of the police officers, you know, runs into the ambulance and immediately starts doing CPR to George Floyd. So he knew that George Floyd was on his deathbed and didn't insist that Chauvin leave his shoulder, his neck, whatever it was, in order to get him into a recovery position and perhaps begin giving medical assistance. That is what I don't understand fundamentally about the whole defense's case. It's that, you know, if a guy is in medical distress, you're aware he's in medical distress, then you ought to treat them as such. You have a crowd even reminding them, telling them, pleading with them that the guy is in medical distress. Please start administering, you know, the kind of medical care you've been trained with. You even got somebody who has medical training, extra medical training there, who was an actual paramedic, saying the same thing, warning them of the same situation. So again, all in all, it strikes me as rather bizarre, given the confluence of circumstances, that the defense can argue that the drug issue had any bearing on the guilt of Derek Chauvin or not. So that's my thoughts anyway. I'm going to be watching the rest of the trial a bit later on. Please do join me once it starts up again. All right, thanks very much. Bye.